Welcome, everybody. Today I'm going to read some of H.S. Harris's commentary on Hegel's phenomenology, specifically sense certainty. So this is chapter 4. 1. The certainty of the senses, or the this and my meaning. I'll just zoom in a little bit. What are we to observe? What we are to observe has been composed for us out of the rough and tumble of actual experience to the necessary evolution of the modern scientific spirit. We begin our observation of the concept of experience with the purely immediate shape of the concept, as it is envisioned in the actual world of modern science. The immediacy of my experience is the limit concept of a flux in which everything is given, only to be cancelled again at once. Cognitive consciousness begins as the intuition of pure change, pure becoming. Out of this abyss, the creation of our cognitive world begins with the universal power of naming singular states of the world. The real things, Sachen, in it. We distinguish these things through their nameable properties. The original flux is first domesticated into a spatio-temporal order of nameable phenomena, which are the properties of different perceptible particular types of things, Dingen. But then our inability to define the unifying concepts that stands under the properties of the supposed substance drives us to understand our world as a universal order of nature. The understanding intuits the unity of the flux as a whole. The unity is a purely conceptual order of laws. The world of appearance in which we were, to begin with, helplessly carried out, is reduced to the subordinate status of being for consciousness. It is the intelligible world of lawfully defined forces that is objectively there. But this world is generated by the naming itself, which has now got control of the flux of experience in an understanding way. And that self, as we recognized even when it first began to name the real things, is a universal self that is shared and jointly maintained by many singular selves. The conceptual world of natural law is the order of appearance within which the many selves are conscious of themselves as a necessarily unified cognition of that order. This communal self-comprehension is the infinite of understanding. The universal self is the living movement of this infinite. When we reach this result, the first movement of the great symphony of experience is over. The evolution of subjective reason deserves to be called a symphony, first because of the basic pattern of theme, development and recapitulation, but also because concrete expression, like inversion, are far more adequate terms for the expression of the movement than the names of the abstract operations of understanding, such as negation, and most of all, because the self-concept of experience is a form generated by motion in time. It is a form that must be recollected and retained in memory in order to exist at all. A. Jacobi and Frau Bauer. 90. The knowing, that is our first standard, must be immediate. The knowing of what simply is. We must be purely receptive and not conceptualize it. Now this, remember, is the section 1 of sense certainty in Hegel's phenomenology. So we can actually go to this. This is around about 84, if I'm correct. I'm just going to read this again so we know what Hegel is actually saying in this. So just give me 1 second. I should have pulled this up before, but anyway, here we go. 90. The knowledge or knowing, which is at the start or is immediately our object, cannot be anything else but the immediate knowledge itself, as knowledge of the immediate or what simply is. Our approach to the object must also be immediate or receptive. We must alter nothing in the object as it presents itself. In apprehending it, we must refrain from trying to comprehend it. Now, we also have, or what I also have here is the German. And it's number 90. So I'm going to read the German as I'm trying to get the German down. So we have Miller's translation here, which is good. Then let's look at Pinkard's. Knowledge, which is our object at the outset. That is, I'm just going to make sure that you can see this. Yeah, you can. Knowledge, which is our object at the outset, that is, immediately, can be nothing but immediate knowledge, knowledge of the immediate, that is, of what is. Likewise, we ourselves have to conduct ourselves immediately, that is, receptively. We therefore are to alter nothing in the object as it presents itself, and we must keep our conceptual grasp of it apart from our apprehension of it. I mean, these translations, the knowledge of knowing, or knowing, which at the start or is immediately our object, cannot be anything else but our immediate knowledge of it, a knowledge of the immediate, of what simply is. Our approach to the object must also be immediate or receptive. We must alter nothing. I mean, there's subtle differences in this. Let's read the German. Yeah, my German isn't the best, so I beg your patience. Das Wissen, welches zuerst oder unmittelbar unser Gegenstand ist, kann kein anderes sein als dasjenige, welches selbst unmittelbares Wissen des unmittelbar oder Seienden ist. Wir haben uns ebenso unmittelbar oder aufnehmend zu verhalten, also nichts an ihm, wie es sich darbietet, zu verändern und von dem Auffassen das Begriffen abzuhalten. Okay. So let's return now to Harris. The one thing that Hegel's introduction did not talk about is where we start, and the reason is obvious. We must start where we are before we have any conscious theories. As the introduction indicated, we must not talk about starting. We must simply begin with what is familiar, with what is so well known that it is taken for granted. We do not start like infants, know nothing but with the first knowledge that we expect our children to acquire. We start with the truth standard that is the elementary criterion of human sanity. We are in the world that Adam bequeathed to us, the world of things with names. To know subsisting objects by their right names is the elementary mode of Wissen, and the ordinary opinion, Meinung, is that this is how our language gets its significance. By referring to objects whose being we can conform by a simple use of the senses, we apprehend these sensible objects, though we do not as yet or necessarily have any comprehension of them. Even this uncomprehending apprehension is different in 1805 than it was, for instance, in the time of St. Augustus. Let us suppose, for argument's sake, that it is a dark, overcast, stormy night. Suddenly there is a bright flash, which frightens our 4-year-old. What is that? Only a flash of lightning, we say. The comforting quality of our certainty comes from all the experience that we have. This includes our implicit popular scientific understanding of thunderstorms. If we still believe in Jupiter tonans, our certainty would be just as absolute, but much less comforting. The point is that our certainty, whether it comforts the child's alarm or increases it, is equally absolute and categorical. We know what this is, or more accurately, for our example, that what that was. The reader who thinks that I have already moved on to a level of perception must be patient for a little while. So far, I have at least avoided such things as houses and trees, which Hegel cheerfully mentions, and by the time I refer to them, I hope the difference between Longfellow's smithy chestnut and a chestnut tree will have become obvious. So, we have read 91. Now we've read 90. Let's read Pinkert, Terry Pinkert, on sense certainty. So we have sense certainty here, number 90. We begin with the immediate of certain. The immediate, the certain. One of the things that emerges quickly is that we really aren't sure what certainty is. Is certainty equivalent to where asking for reasons runs out, where I conclude that this is simply what I do? Not really. One can run out of reasons and still not be certain of that one is where one should be. We look for something, for some instance, where we would initially be comfortable and settled with saying, I know that. The initial position should be also free of concepts, since whatever conceptual description you give will be open, the initial position should be also free of concepts, since whatever conceptual description you give will open things up about whether you are already begging the question. We look for something we would know without having to know anything else. Let's see what we have in Poolgate, sense certainty. Okay. So I'm not going to read much. Yeah, I'm just going to read the first. Okay. Let's read a few pages of Poolgate. Chapter 3, reading the text. The phenomenology is meant to show how the experience of consciousness takes it from the standpoint of sense certainty to that of absolute knowing. Hegel understood this development to be driven forward by the logic that is inherent in the experience of consciousness. In what follows, I have concentrated on trying to make this logic as clear as possible. I have thus said very little, indeed almost nothing, about the historical phenomena that correspond to the various shapes of consciousness that emerge. I hope that, however, that my approach will help readers of the phenomenology understand why Hegel thought the development he describes is necessary. They will then be in a position to assess for themselves whether the phenomenology succeeds in fulfilling the specific task Hegel set for it. Consciousness, sense certainty. Sense certainty in Hegel's view is natural consciousness in its simplest and most immediate form. It takes its object to be there before it immediately and thinks nothing of the object is hidden from view. It believes that it has before it the sheer being or unalloyed immediacy of the thing. It takes itself in turn to know such immediacy immediately. It does not know its object by means of concepts, but takes itself to be directly acquainted with it. Sense certainty, Hegel writes, is immediate knowledge itself, a knowledge of the immediate or of what simply is. And this is what we read in aphorism 90 just there. Sense certainty is sense certainty because it takes its object to be immediately given to the senses in space and time. So, one question that I would have here, is this similar to Heidegger's concept, es gibt, it gives? Or do we take this in an empirical sense? So, sort of sense certainty, or maybe even a Kantian sense, sort of manifold givenness. It sees and hears many things. Indeed, it confronts an infinite wealth for which no bounds can be found, but it takes each thing to be given. Givenness, or Sellers, the myth of the given, to here and now, and in its immediacy. Accordingly, sense certainty always has something quite specific in view. It sees this night, this day, this house, or this tree. I mean, are these not what Pinkert is warning of here? I mean, if we look at Terry Pinkert, so we're not sure what this certainty is certainly equivalent to all of this. We look for some instance where we would initially be comfortable and settle with saying, I know that. The initial position should also be free of concepts. But if they're free of concepts, how can we say night, this day, this house, this tree? I mean, they are, a tree is an object, but it's bound up with our concepts. I think Quine talks about something similar to this. Yet it does not identify its object explicitly as a house, rather than a tree. For to do so would be to understand it by means of a contrast with something else, and the object would thus not be known immediately. Sense certainty sees this house and is aware that it is not this tree. But it does not focus on the difference between the two things. It attends directly to the immediacy of the thing before it. It thus does not say, this is a house, not a tree, or even merely this is a house. All that it says about what it knows is just that it is, and its truth contains nothing but the sheer being of the thing. Indeed, sense certainty not only says no more than this, but also has in mind no more than this. Such immediate consciousness of the specific is something we are familiar with in our everyday experience. We share in it. Whenever we say or think, we are conscious of this. In ordinary usage, the word or thought, this is meant to focus the mind on a specific individual, as in, look at this. But it is meant to do so directly, without the interference or mediating concepts or descriptions. Sense certainty, which claims to be immediate consciousness of the specific, thus necessarily thinks of its objects as simply this. More precisely, since it takes its object to be given in space and time, it thinks of it as this here and this now. Furthermore, such certainty takes itself to be no more than this immediate consciousness, or this I. It takes itself to be a specific individual, one I among many, but it does not differentiate itself explicitly from other I's being given by a name. It thinks of itself simply as this I that is immediately aware of this object. In Hegel's own words, consciousness is I, nothing more than pure this. This individual consciousness knows a pure this, or the individual. In the introduction to the Phenomenology, Hegel writes that in what consciousness affirms from within itself as being in itself, or the true, we have the standard which consciousness itself sets up by which to measure what it knows. We can now see clearly what sense certainty affirms as the true, what it first takes to be its object to be. The object is not the play of forces or the world of spirit, but simply this here now. In its immediacy, specificity, and uniqueness, the task of the phenomenology is to trace the experience that is generated by this object and discover whether this object is preserved in the experience of it. Okay, yeah, let's keep on going with this because this is good. The first experience of sense certainty, the now. In the Science of Logic, Hegel maintains that there is nothing in heaven, or in nature, or mind, or anywhere else, which does not equally contain both immediacy and mediation. Yet unlike, for example, Adorno, Hegel does not draw on his philosophical insight in order to challenge the idea that one can be immediately aware of the immediacy of what is before one. Phenomenology, in Hegel's view, must set all philosophical convictions to one side and undertake an immanent examination of the experience undergone by sense certainty. That's a really important sentence. It must seek to discover, therefore, where such certainty is led by its own conviction that it beholds the immediacy of this specific thing. At the start of his examination of sense certainty, Hegel proposes a simple experiment. He asks sense certainty what it is aware of. What is the this? Or more precisely, what is the now? To this question, Hegel says we ourselves answer, for example, now is night. We have to give this answer on behalf of sense certainty because it does not identify its object as the night, but takes it simply to be this now. We then write this truth and keep it until daytime. We then look at it again and see that it is no longer true, since it is now no longer night but day. We are forced to conclude, therefore, that this truth has become stale. This experiment seems curious, since it does not initially appear to demonstrate anything that sense certainty would find problematic. After all, sense certainty never claimed that it would be true to say it is night during the day. It comes clear from 96, however, that Hegel's real aim is to show not just that what was written down becomes stale over time, but that as night gives way to day, sense certainty actually remains conscious of the very same thing. Sense certainty is conscious of this now without further qualification. It sees the night and thinks that it has this in mind in all its specificity. But it does not further identify itself as object, as the night, to itself or anyone else. All it has explicitly in mind is the thought, this is now before me. This means, therefore, that it is explicitly conscious, not of its object, objects being the night as opposed to the day, but simply of its object being now before it. This consciousness, however, remains as night gives way to day, for in the day, just as at night, sense certainty is conscious of its objects being now before it. Indeed, this remains the case whatever sense certainty encounters. What sense certainty is explicitly conscious of, therefore, proves to be wholly universal. In this, of course, not meant to be universal, because in being conscious of this now, sense certainty thinks it has in view the unique specificity of the thing through the simple passage of time. However, sense certainty learns that it has nothing specific in view after all, but something quite indeterminate and universal. The being this now before me that can belong to anything. The result of Hegel's analysis is not, by the way, that we can never be conscious of specific things. Hegel's claim, in the words of Robert Stern, is that nothing we can know about the object is unique of it, if we stick to just sense certainty. The specificity of things eludes sense certainty because it refuses to identify them explicitly, but thinks of each purely as this here now. And it does that because it thinks that in doing so, it will have in view the undiluted immediacy of the thing. Sense certainty's concern for immediacy is thus what cosigns it to utter indeterminacy. Okay. Thinking of, or talking of Robert Stern, we're going to go to have a look at what he has to say here. And again, we're only going to read a little bit. I don't know, we might have to read a little bit more. We're only going to read 2 pages. The first chapter of the Phenomenology on Consciousness opens with a description of sense certainty, or the this and the meaning. At the most general level, commentators have agreed about how Hegel intended us to conceive of sense certainty, namely as a form of consciousness that thinks the best way to gain knowledge of the world is to experience it directly or intuitively without applying concepts to it. When what Hegel calls immediate rather than mediated knowledge, which involves apprehension rather than comprehension, it is clear that Hegel thinks that this is the most elementary and fundamental way we have of thinking about how the mind relates to the world, which is why he begins the phenomenology here. At the same time, Hegel wishes to bring about how sense certainty gains its attractiveness by trading on a commitment that appears plausible, but which turns out to be highly problematic. And once this is recognized, our attachment to sense certainty as a paradigm of knowledge will be lost. So here we go. We have its attractiveness as a trading on a commitment that appears plausible, but then we go through it and it's not so plausible. What is the deceptive plausibility commitment underlying sense certainty? At this point, there is disagreement among commentators. For some interpreters, the motivation behind sense certainty is a commitment to epistemic foundationalism. So that's one point, which posits direct intuitive experience as giving us a kind of unshakable hookup to the world on which knowledge is built. For others, it is a commitment to empiricism, as I said, according to which intuitive knowledge is prior to conceptual knowledge because empirical concepts are learned and get their meaning by being linked to objects as they are given in experience. And yet for others, it is a commitment to realism. which holds that if the mind is not to distort or create the world, it needs to be in a position to gain access to the world in a passive manner without the mediation of conceptual activity. So the kind of direct experience envisioned by sense certainty must be fundamental. Thus, some commentators take Hegel's principal target in this chapter to be epistemic foundationalism. Others take it to be content empiricism, and others take it to be realism. And we have De Vries, Westwald, and Craig are the scholars here that Stern is looking at. Now, Hegel certainly associates all these attitudes with sense certainty in its preliminary characterization of it, saying that it claims to be the richest and truest form of knowledge insofar as it involves merely reaching out to things without omitting anything from them. However, it is arguable that although the outlook of sense certainty is indeed foundationalist, empiricist, and realist, there is a yet deeper assumption here that is really Hegel's more fundamental concern. This is the assumption that because it does not use concepts, sense certainty is in a position to grasp things as an individual without any abstraction from its unique, specifically or pure particularity, and that in so doing, sense certainty gives us the most important kind of knowledge, which is of things as concrete singular entities. I think that's a phenomenal description of what Hegel is concerned about. For this reason, sense certainty prioritized the one-to-one relation of direct experience over the generality and abstractness of thought, and so treats apprehension as more fundamental than comprehension. An account of sense certainty along these lines can be found in the writings of Hegel's existentialist critics. From Ludwig Feuerbach onwards, see Denies for discussion and further reference. This reading of the chapter on sense certainty fits with what offered above from the phenomenology as a whole, according to which the phenomenology takes us through a series of inadequate standpoints which reveal how our handling of the categories of individual and universal is one-sided. As we shall see as we proceed through the remaining chapters of consciousness, through perception into the force and the understanding, Hegel tries to show that consciousness impoverished conception of these two categories consistently leads into difficulties, thereby bringing out dialectical limitations in its thinking. Okay, so there's a lot there to take in with Stern. So here is where we've left, page 77 in the PDF, and we'll come back to Stern. But I want to go back to Hegel, 91, which is a big one. Because of its concrete content, sense certainty immediately appears as the richest kind of knowledge, indeed a knowledge of infinite wealth for which no bounds can be found, either when we reach out into space and time in which it is dispersed, or when we take a bit of this wealth and by division enter into it. Moreover, sense certainty appears to be the truest knowledge, for it has not yet omitted anything from the object, but has the object before it in its perfect entirety. But in the event, this very certainty proves itself to be the most abstract and purest truth. All that it says about what it knows is just that it is, and its truth contains nothing but the sheer being of the thing, Sache. Consciousness, for its part, is in this certainty only as a pure I, or I am in it only as a pure this, and the object similarly only as a pure this. I, this particular I, am certain of this particular thing, not because I, qua consciousness and knowing it, have developed myself or thought about it in various ways, and also not because of the thing of which I am certain, in virtue of a host of distinct qualities, would be in its own self a rich complex of connections or related in various ways to other things. Neither of these has anything to do with the truth of sense certainty. Here, neither I nor the thing has the significance of a complex process of mediation. The I does not have the significance of a manifold imagining or thinking, nor does the thing signify something that has a host of qualities. On the contrary, the thing is, and it is merely because it is. This goes back to what Stern says here. It is because it is. This Hegel's fundamental concern, more fundamental concern. This is the assumption that because it does not use concepts, sense certainty is in a position to grasp things as an individual without any abstraction from its unique specificity or pure particularity, and that in doing so, sense certainty gives us the most important kind of knowledge, which is of things as concrete singular entities. This is the essential point for sense knowledge, and this pure being, or this simple immediacy, constitutes its truth. Similarly, certainty as a connection is immediate pure connection. Consciousness as I, nothing more, a pure this, the singular consciousness knows a pure this, or the single item. Okay, let's see how I get on with the German. This is going to be a big one. Der konkret Inhalt door sinnlichen Gewissheit lasst sie unmittelbar als die rechte erkennst, ja als einen Erkenntnis von unendlichem Reichtum erscheinen, für welche ebensowohl, wenn wir im Raum und in der Zeit als worin sich ausbetreibt, hinaus, als wenn wir uns ein Stück aus dieser Fülle nehmen und durch Teilung in dasselbe hineingehen, keine Grenze zu finden ist. Sie erscheint außerdem als die wahrhafteste, denn sie hat von dem Gegenstand noch nichts Wegelassen, sondern in seiner ganzen Vollständigkeit vor sich. Diese Gewissheit aber gibt in der Tat sich selbst vor die abstrakteste und ernst Wahrheit aus. Sie zeigt von dem, was sie weiß, nur dies aus. Es ist und ihr Wahrheit enthält allen das Sein der Sache, das Bewusstsein seinerseits ist in dieser Gewissheit nur als reinen Ich. Oder ich bin darin nur als reiner dieser und der Gegenstand ebenso nur als reines dieses. Ich dieser bin dieser, sag nicht darum gewiss, will ich als Bewusstsein, hebe mich entwickelt und mannigfaltig die Gedanken bewegt, auch nicht darum, will die Sache, deren ich gewiss bin, nach einer Menge unterschiedener Beschlaffenheiten einer reche Beziehung an ihr selbst oder in welflasht Verhalten zu anderwer. Beides gehen die Wahrheit durch sinnlichen Gewissheit nicht an, weder ich noch die Sache hat deren die Bedeutung einer mannigfaltigen Vermittlung, ich nicht die Bedeutung eines mannigfaltigen Vorstellen oder Denkens, noch die Sache die Bedeutung mannigfaltiger Beschlaffenheiten, sondern die Sache ist und sie ist, nur weil sie ist. Sie ist, dieses ist dem Sinnlichen. Wissen das Wissentliche Und dieses reine Sein oder dieses Einfach. Unmittelbarkeit macht ihre Wahrheit aus. Ebenso ist die Gewissheit als Besserung unmittelbar eine Besserung. Das Bewusstsein ist ich, wieder nicht ein reiner dieser. Der Einzel bis reiner dieses oder das eins Island. Now, I'm sorry, but I gotta learn. I shouldn't actually even apologize. I'm trying my best. So, where are we now? Going to number 2. 91. Sensible sense certainty appears as the richest cognition because nothing is left out. Richness is infinite in outward extension, temporal and spatial, and inward detail. But the truth that we get from this perfect concreteness is absolutely abstract. All that consciousness can say about the object thus certified is, it is. And all we can say is, this self knows this. The self is not a thoughtful memory, and the thing not a manifold of distinguished characters. The thing is because it is. The self is just a singular certainty of this. Okay, let's see what Harris has to say. This paragraph both states the philosophical concept and anticipates the philosophical experience of our sensory knowledge. The concept is paradoxical because it is the essence of the immediate consciousness, not the concept. So the implicit assumption of ordinary opinion about experience is contrasted with the result that emerges from the philosophical attempt to isolate just what is immediately certain. According to the view of healthy common sense, our immediate sense experience is a direct contact with what is, just as it is. Our experience, as it is, we experience das Sein des immediately. Its absoluteness is revealed to us as an inexhaustible, truly incomprehensible infinity. It is infinite in its greatness and equally infinite in its smallness. The healthy common sense of Hegel's German contemporaries who agreed with Thomas Reid was a naive realist that had both Zeno and Leibniz behind it. But as a pre-philosophical mode of consciousness, Hegel will eventually offer us the religion of the Zenavesta as the model of it. This reminds us forcibly that it is quite possible to have the consciousness of the bad infinity, of the sensible world, as an object of cognition without having any philosophical theories about it. The world of our immediate experience is such that the nets and webs of our language can never capture even one moment of it in all its fullness. Our finite knowledge remains a mere abstraction from it, however far we press our inquiry, and however much we succeed in saying about the most minute element of this world. There is always the same infinity that remains unexplored or unsaid. But to say that is to say at once that in the philosophical sense, our cognition of this infinitely rich object is the poorest cognition possible. All that we can say about every element is just that it is. Beyond that, we are reduced to edifying negations. It's infinitely rich. It's inexhaustible. In one word, it is transcendent. It is important to formulate sense certainty as a religious standpoint. First, because this clarifies its shape for us as a moment of absolute knowing. Sense certainty is precisely the pre-philosophical attitude that is anti-philosophy because it apprehends immediately that what is, as immediately given to sense awareness, is incomprehensible. The absolute being cannot be conceptualized except as something about which nothing can be said. This is not, for instance, the it is of Parmenides. For on the one hand, that does not give rise to sense certainty at all. And on the other hand, Parmenides does manage to tell us what this proposition it is means. Sense certainty cannot do that. For as soon as we say more than it is, the concept, the Begriff, will get a grip on us. Then we must either admit our mistakes and retreat to the edifying negations and reverent contemplations of our sense certainty and divinity, or else we must let the dialectic of language take us at least as far as the noumenal it is of the Parmenidean understanding. I have given Jacobi's name to this first moment because he assimilated the religious sense to the familiar immediacy of sense certainty. Hegel is not explicitly concerned with sense certainty as an absolute standpoint here, because in that religious shape, it is not just pre-philosophical, but anti-philosophical. We cannot drag it out of its religious fastness, to make it go with us, but when we cannot force ordinary common sense to go with us either. Even as finite awareness, sense certainty can, if it is consistently and rigorously sensible, maintain its calm acceptance of the world of sense experience as we apprehend it. This paragraph is mainly concerned with the definition of how it is possible. Sense certainty, being absolutely immediate, can only be defined by contrasting it with the next stage, where mediation has begun. The sense certainty consciousness exists in the immediate presence of what is der Sache. For what it knows generally and particularly is that this is so. The Sachen in this world are not the things of perception which have properties in a properly defined sense. Sense certainty does not have any theories about what the thing is, whether the Sache referred to as the whole objective world or some of its identifiable parts. And the self that has sense certainty is certain of itself in a singular knowing. There is nothing discursive in this Wissen. It is not Erkennen, which can explain itself, make hypotheses, draw conclusions, and make appropriate judgments. Sense certainty just knows how it is, or how things are. This Wissen knows that it is sometimes mistaken, the way things go of 10 surprises. But its criterion of truth is immediate apprehension. It can, for example, apprehend its own uncertainty. Doubt and bewilderment are not unfamiliar to it, but it does not allow itself to be troubled by these experiences in any conceptual way. As a stable gestalt, it knows immediately both what it knows and what it does not know. It accepts its ignorance and placidly and securely as it accepts knowledge. We are where we are to find such a consciousness. As a philosophical stance, we can find it easily in the schools of common sense that have, in direct experience, an unshakable certain criterion for certainty. This is a hand, says G. Moore. Descartes points to the possibility of hallucination even about that, and the skeptics he was dealing with had already raised the question of how we know that we are not dreaming. But in a sense certainty philosopher will not allow the immediate awareness that she is awake or is now active arguing with the skeptics be overturned by any such artificial doubts about these. A mitigated skeptic like Hume's Philo is one who preserves his natural knowledge inviolate. While pursuing philosophical inquiries critically, such a one has only the standard of sense certainty as her standard of what is absolutely true. Thus she may maintain that we do not rationally know what the law of gravity holds absolutely, but the natural security of good sense will always ensure that she leaves the room by the door, and not the window. Upon this view, the only absolute truth is the truth of actual experience in the sensible world. Skeptical empiricism, Hume's mitigated skepticism, is the great philosophical bulwark of this natural, quite unphilosophical certainty. Critical philosophy has generally been orientated by it. The only critical philosophy that can be turned against it is one that has some nonsensible certainty which appears equally imperative. For instance, Kant's certainty of the moral law. For this reason, it can be said that hardly any of the critics who have discussed Hegel's theory of consciousness in English, and there has been more Anglophone discussion of the first two chapters than of any other part of the book, have been in a position to embark upon Hegel's quest for absolute knowledge at all. They already have the only absolute that they can conceive of. For these followers of Hume, science and philosophy are about something else altogether. Newtonian mechanics and the law of gravitation may not be absolutely true, but the certainty that if I step out of an upstairs window, I shall fall as an existential absoluteness of a different kind. To suppose that philosophical criticism can comprehend this experiential visum and turn it into some kind of truth which is not finite, in the way that the embodied certainty intuitively knows itself to be finite, will seem plainly absurd to the critical thinkers for whom the horizon of common sense is really absolute. Wow, there's a lot written here. Those who do not dismiss the project of comprehension categorically as a misunderstanding of the proper relation between thought and experience will have to concede that it posits a different relationship between philosophy and life that they are accustomed to take for granted in the lecture room. It is not an academic but an existential examination of life that Hegel proposes. His quest for absolute knowing is the Socratic examination that cares for our souls. So it naturally starts with the knowledge from experience that we all live by. We shall sometimes find ourselves in the lecture room, for instance, in the perception chapter, but we must never lose hold of the concrete certainty of our sense experience. For it is just that certainty that is to be raised to its truth. Of course, the critical empiricist is not simply at the level of sense certainty. She has a massive amount of theoretical knowledge in the kind called understanding, and she does not need to be skeptical about it. The mitigated skeptic is a philosopher who has consciously separated the sensible truth of experience, Russell's knowledge by acquaintance, from the debatable truth of all theories. So, she can properly be said to have reflectively established sense certainty as the criterion of absolute knowledge. But no philosopher is really a singular self who knows this singular thing. I believe that we can move the most commonsensical mind that is disposed to be philosophical at all, to go with us on our journey. Such a one will only smile at Descartes' hypothesis of the genie Malin, but she will readily admit that hallucination, or the sensible feeling that a hand is still there when it has been amputated, does not show the truth criterion for even the most personal experience, is a social consensus of observation, not a singular certainty that it is so. The real paradigm of sense certainty is the consciousness of Hegel's Bauer's Frau, who is comfortably at home in her world of singular things, each with its proper name. The peasant wife lives within the circle of her Lisa, who is her best cow, then the black one, the spotted one, and so on, also of Martin, her lad, and Ursula, her lass. To the philosopher, infinity, knowledge, movement, empirical laws are things just as familiar, and as her dead brother and uncle are present. To the peasant wife, so Plato, Spinoza are present to the philosopher. The one has as much actuality as the other, but the latter are mortal. The reason why Hegel compares the visum of the peasant woman with that of the philosopher here is obvious. It is not that the sense of being at home with familiar things has to be overcome, though that is true as well, and the long journey of estrangement and despair lies between the two of them, but they are both at home in a world of immediate visum, and the philosopher's home is not this cottage and its farmyard, but the whole world of spiritual existence. The Hegelian philosopher is like the peasant woman in that everything she does is part of actual living, part of the integral awareness of her own life. That is the fruit of the sublated presence of the standard of self-consciousness and absolute visum. We do not ever leave sense certainty behind, though, of course, we do leave some philosophical views that are founded upon it, at least for the time being. The consciousness that we are observing thinks it can do that, but we know better. Very good. Let's read some Hugent. In 1839, 80 years after Hegel's death, the young Hegelian Feuerbach accused Hegel of playing a verbal game in his analysis of sense certainty. All Hegel shows, Feuerbach claims, is that the words here and now do not specify the objects to which they refer. In Feuerbach's view, this shows the limitations of language, but not of sense certainty itself. Even if words fail us, sense certainty is perfectly conscious as sense certainty of specific characters of things. Feuerbach's charge appears to gain support from Hegel's claim that in sense certainty we do not, in Savage, Vorstellung, the universal this or being in general, but we utter the universal. In my view, however, this appearance is misleading. Language is not itself responsible for the indeterminacy and universality that comes to afflict sense certainty, but it reveals the immediacy and universality in the very consciousness of this here now. Hegel maintains that the universal is the truth, das Wahre, of sense certainty, and language expresses this truth alone. This suggests not that a language causes a problem between sense certainty, but that it expresses the truth that emerges below the level of language in sense certainty itself. In my view, the object of sense certainty proves to be universal, because such certainty is immediate sensuous certainty and so takes its object to be spatial temporal. As such, the latter is understood to be a now or a here connected to other moments and points. If per impossible, there were only one moment of sense certainty, then the consciousness of this now would clearly hold in view that moment alone. For sense certainty, however, one movement in time and one point in space leads to another. Yet, sense certainty always takes itself to be conscious of this now and of its objects being now before it. Accordingly, as one moment gives way to the next, this now continues to be the object of consciousness. As Hegel puts it, the now preserves itself. It is continuing to be the object of consciousness in being preserved. That the now becomes something universal. The now first comes to be a universal not in being uttered in language, but in the passage of time from now one to another. This now is initially taken by consciousness to be a universal, not to be a universal, but to be something quite specific. This now before me, as one now gives way to another now, however, the now is preserved as the object of consciousness and so comes to be something universal, something that is encountered not just now, but also now. The universality displayed by the now thus has a distinctive character, since it emerges in and through the vanishing of one moment into another, the vanishing of night into day and day into night. And now is not immediate, but mediated. This is because it is determined as a permanent and self-preserving now, through the fact that something else, vis-a-vis day and night, is not. At the same time, it remains a simple, indeterminate object of consciousness. This now, with no further qualification or complexity as such, it remains the object of consciousness, whatever example is at hand. As Hegel puts it, the now is indifferent to what happens in it, was noch bei ihm verspielt, indifferent to whether it is night or day. Note that this simple now does not transcend the individual nows that vanish and arise, but continues in and through them. The now, in Hegel's words, is thus a simple thing which is through negation, which is neither this nor that, or not this, and is with equal indifference this as well as that, and this structure marks out as a universal. It is, moreover, an abstract universal because it is utterly indeterminate. But before we move on to consider a second experience of sense certainty, two further points need to be made. First, although 95 suggests that sense certainty undergoes at first experience only because we write something down and show it to such certainty later in the day, this act of writing is not central to that experience. We do not bring about the dialectic of transformation of the object of sense certainty into an actual universal by our act of writing down what sense certainty is aware of. As becomes clear in 96, the work of writing is done without any activity on the part of the phenomenologist, by time itself. All the writing down achieves, therefore, is to show sense certainty the consequence of the temporality to which it knows itself to be subject. The first experience of sense certainty thus remains quite imminent. Indeed, in my view, the whole experiment of writing could be dropped without detriment to Hegel's account. The paragraph on writing could be deleted, and all one would need to say is this: sense certainty is aware of this now, but time moves on for sense certainty itself. The now is not nonetheless preserved as the object of sense certainty, and so proves in the experience of consciousness itself to be universal. Second, it is we phenomenologists who call the emergent object of sense certainty universal. That technical term is not employed by such certainty. Nonetheless, the object comes to have a structure of a universal. For sense certainty itself, sense certainty is demonstrated in its own self that the truth of its object is the universal. Sense certainty itself therefore experiences the transformation of its object and the loss of the object as it initially takes it to be. This way, both sense certainty and the reader are educated by this first experience of consciousness. Both see that the object as initially conceived itself generates the experience in which it proves not to be what it is first taken to be. The initial object is, however, simply replaced by a new object. The object remains this now, but this very object, this now, proves in the experience of it to be an indeterminate and universal rather than specific, and so proves to be other than it is first taken to be. The analysis of sense certainty to begin with, at least thus conforms to the method of phenomenology set out in the introduction. For the initial conception consciousness has of its object is undermined and subjected to imminent critique by its own experience. By the way, though I have concentrated on now, though I have concentrated on the now, consciousness of this here is subject to a similar dialectic. Hegel describes this dialectic in these lines, which I shall leave to speak for themselves. Here is the tree. If I turn around, this truth has vanished and is converted into the opposite. No tree is here, but a house instead. Here itself does not vanish. On the contrary, it abides constant in the vanishing of the house, the tree, and is indifferently house or tree. Again, therefore, this shows itself to be mediated simplicity or universality. So let's see what Terry Pinkard has to say about 91. Of what are we certain? If we just say it is while pointing something out, we haven't said much, other than it is nothing. This would be what we were looking for. It's non-conceptual. It's just a pure act of pointing out. You just point at something, that one. You don't supposedly give a conceptual characterization through a predicate. You don't say what it is at all. You just say that one. So sense certainty goes from 90 all the way up to 110. Yeah, I think that was a very, very nice introduction. I mean, reading Pinkard, the German, reading Pinkard's guide, reading Houlgate was very helpful, reading Stern was really, really helpful. So we might read a little bit more here, because he does do, we might read down to 92. Hegel emphasizes that for sense certainty, it is the individuality, and remember we're reading Stern here. It's on page 77. There is no page numbers, but it's in the sense certainty chapter for Stern. Hegel emphasizes that for sense certainty, it is the individuality of the object that is taken to be ontologically fundamental. As he puts it towards the end of the section, sense certainty holds that the existence of external objects, which can be more precisely defined as actual, absolutely singular, wholly personal individual things, each of them absolutely unlike anything else, has absolute certainty and truth. The aim of this section, and here we go, another great quote by Stern, the aim of this section is then to bring out how sense certainty's a-conceptual view of knowledge appears natural to it, because it conceives of individuality in this way, as something an object has apart from universality and particularity. By showing how this conception is problematic, consciousness comes to see how this view of knowledge is mistaken, and that its epistemic paradigm is ill-founded. Sense certainty adopts its a-conceptual view of knowledge because it thinks that it will grasp what constitutes the unique essence of the thing as an individual only if it does not use concepts in knowing that individual. For sense certainty holds concepts can be applied to many different things, and so cannot tell us about the thing in qua individual. This unique nature belongs to each entity, is traditionally called thisness, heeketas, heeketas. Insofar as it has this unique nature, the individual is claimed to be irreducible to any shareable qualities, and so is said to be ontologically prior to any such qualities. In being what it is, in a way that is wholly unlike anything else, it therefore appears to sense certainty that it can be grasped by the subject, or I, directly without any conceptual activity. So let's read this quote from Hegel. Consciousness, for its part, is this sense certainty only as a pure I, or I am in it only as a pure this. The object, similarly, only as a pure this. I, this particular I am certain of this particular thing, not because I, qua consciousness and knowing it, have developed myself or thought about it in various ways, and also not because this, the thing, of which I am certain in virtue of a host of distinct qualities, would be in its own self a rich complex of connections or related in various ways to other things. Neither of these has anything to do with the truth of sense certainty. Here, neither I nor the thing has the significance of a complex process of mediation. The I does not have the significance of a manifold imagining of thinking, nor does the thing signify something that has a host of qualities. On the contrary, the thing is, and it is, merely because it is. It is, this is the essential point for sense knowledge, and this pure being or the simple immediacy constitutes its truth. Similarly, certainty as a conception or connection is an immediate pure connection. Consciousness is I, nothing more, a pure this. The singular consciousness knows a pure this or a single item. Insofar as sense certainty maintains that the being of the object is constituted by unique individuality in this way, sense certainty naturally also holds that knowledge needs to be aconceptual, and that such knowledge is the richest and truest, for it holds, if we bring in concepts, we bring in general terms that can only take us away from knowing the object in its singularity. Empiricism leaves thought no powers except abstraction and formal universality and identity. What Hegel sets out to show, however, is that in the event this very certainty proves itself to be the most abstract and purest truth. Now, as Hegel points out, sense certainty faces a difficulty straight away, as it is hard to see how sense certainty can claim to be aware of nothing but the object before it as a singular individual, when it is also aware of itself as a subject having experienced the object. Among the countless differences cropping up here, we find, in every case, that the crucial one is that, in sense certainty, pure being at once splits up into what we have called the two thises. One this as I, and one this, and one and the other as this as object. Okay, so an interesting thought that I had was, is the relationship between sense certainty, and I'm just Googling this now, and Buddhism? Thisness. I mean, in meditation, are we not trying to do this very thing, to be aware of concepts? Could Hegel be critiquing a sort of Buddhist valuing of this here now? This here now. So we have, looking over, I mean, I thought that Harris's treatment of this was very interesting, because the paradoxical nature They all agree that, conceptual determination or determining conceptuality is what Hegel is sort of critiquing here. Now, this point or this sentence by Harris is very interesting. It is important to formulate sense certainty as a religious standpoint because this clarifies its shape for us as a moment of absolute knowing. And in a sense, I thought that this section, sense certainty is precisely pre-philosophical. I thought that was normal conscious, natural consciousness. I suppose sense certainty is part of natural consciousness. Yeah, and this was also great. Sense certainty cannot do that, for as soon as we say more than it is, the begriff will get a grip on us. And this is what I'm talking about in regards to the Buddhistic element here. Yeah, and this point even here, this is a great paragraph too. So thisness, the limitations of thisness. '92. But when we look, and here we go, here's the pivot in '92. But when we look carefully at this pure being, which constitutes the essence of this certainty, and which this certainty pronounces to be its truth, we see that much more is involved. An actual sense certainty is not merely this pure immediacy, but an instance of it. Among the countless differences cropping up here, we find in every case that the crucial one is that in sense certainty, pure being splits up into what we have called the two thises. One this as I, and the other this as object. So we have a subject-object distinction. When we reflect on this difference, we find that neither one nor the other is only immediately present in sense certainty, but each is at the same time mediated. I have this certainty through something else, vis-a-vis the thing, and it similarly is in sense certainty through something else, vis-a-vis through the I. Okay. So 92. Will we read the German? I feel myself getting tired now. An dem Reinen-Sein aber, welches das Wesen dieser Gewissheit ausmacht und welches sie als ihre Wahrheit aussagt, spielt. Wenn wir so sein, noch wels ander Bär eine wirklich sinnliche Gewissheit. This word comes up all the time. What is that word? Gewissheit. Certainty, of course. Natürlich. Gewissheit. Gewissheit ist nicht nur diese reine Unmittelbarkeit, sondern ein Beispiel derselben unter den unseligen dabei vorkommenden Unterschieden finden wir allenthalben die Hauptverschiedenheit, das nämlich in ihr Sorglicht aus dem reinen Sein die beiden schon genannten, diesen an dieser als Ich und ein dieser als Gestand vorausfallen, reflektieren wir über diesen Unterschied. So ergibt sich das wieder, dass ein noch das andere noch unmittelbar in die sinnlichen Gewissheit ist, sondern sogleich als vermittelt. Ich habe die Gewissheit durch ein anderes, nämlich die Sache. Und dieses ist ebenso in der Gewissheit durch ein anderes, nämlich durch ich. Okay, let's see where we are now with. So we had the German up. Let's see what Harris has to say on this. But there is a lot of byplay upon the pure being that is stated truth, and this certainty, an actual case of sense certainty, is an example, Beispiel, byplay, of pure immediacy. And there's always two thises, the self and the object. Neither is immediately sensed. Each is mediated by contrast as being or as certain. I'm certain that this is. Taken absolutely as Jacobi took it, the certainty of sense experience is the certainty of being engulfed in an incomprehensible infinite. Wow. As the opaque experience from which all would be scientific. Discourse is an abstraction. The certainty that it is becomes the night in which all cows are black. But the certainty of the senses is not, of itself, philosophical at all. Hence there is a more to be observed in it than the naivety of the void with respect to cognition. In the pure being which constitutes the essence of the certainty and which it expresses as its truth, there is still much else which, if we watch, has its part to play on the side. To state the absolute philosophical truth of sense certainty immediately, as Jacobi does, is to lose what is philosophically of the greatest value in the experience of it and of its world. Sense certainty is not pure immediacy, which is actually impossible, but a byplay on sensory immediacy, an example of it. To state the absolute philosophical truth of sense certainty immediately, as Jacobi does, is to lose what is philosophically of the greatest value of experience of it, and loses it in this world. Sense certainty is not pure immediacy, which is actually impossible, but a play on sensory immediacy, an example of it. We do not normally have the awful certainty of the object as this, though we can have it, for example, in the lightning flash, which is why I choose that my example in commenting on paragraph 90. For the most part, we live comfortably in our non-philosophical finite certainty about what this is. It is when God is not in the garden that Adam is truly the Lord of all that he surveys. I'm using the myth deliberately as a non-philosophical mode of talking about what is true absolutely. Hegel's peasant wife is Eve living in the garden that Adam cultivates, the endless multiplicity of the differences that we can take over and make ours by naming them as a bad infinity of consciousness. Here the certainty of the senses is not an absolute truth, but an indefinitely repeatable process. The process of the byplay has the same structure as the absolute truth of sense certainty. It is the basic structure of consciousness as such, that I, who am certain of myself as this knower, am also certain of the object as this Sache. And in this very structure, we can find the key both to Locke's bewilderment about substance and to Hume's bewilderment about the self. For when we reflect on this distinction, the primitive distinction upon which all the variety of consciousness depends, we can recognize that our immediate certainty of both terms is also mediated. Our certainty of self depends on the otherness of the object, and the otherness of the object depends on the identity of self. This is already something more, in a way, of philosophical insight than we could achieve in the absolute naivety of the void with respect to cognition. Okay. Yeah, let's do this, and we'll call it a night. The second experience of sense certainty, the dialectic of the eye. This is now, we're really getting into it. In the experience of sense certainty, as we have seen, the object of sense certainty, this here now, comes to diverge from what it is initially taken to be. At this point, Hegel notes we can compare the former with the latter. Such a comparison could not be undertaken at the outset, but becomes possible through the experience of sense certainty. We now see, therefore, that the universal which the object has come to be is no longer what the object is supposed essentially to be for sense certainty. Sense certainty sees this too, and its awareness of this disparity drives it back into itself. It knows that the object is not meant to be indeterminate and universal, but something wholly specific. It now looks to itself, therefore, to preserve its consciousness of the specific in face of its experience. Accordingly, sense certainty now claims that it is conscious of something specific, not because its object is simple and immediate, but because its own certainty is immediate. For sense certainty, the specificity and immediacy of the object before me are held in view by the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, by the immediate certainty of the eye. This means that the object I take myself to be certain of is itself subtly transformed. It is no longer merely this, here, now, but what I mean by this, what I know to be immediately present before me. Hegel notes, however, that in this relationship, sense certainty experiences the same dialectic acting upon itself as the previous one. The problem, put simply, is this. If all I am aware of is what I mean by this, I do not actually have anything specific in mind, for another I is equally conscious of what I mean by this. What I mean by this is thus just as vague and indeterminate as this here now. It remains beyond me. What other eyes are certain of, and indeed what I myself am certain of at other times and other places. And so when I am myself another I, then the one I am now. By thinking of what I am immediately certain of, I think I have in mind something utterly specific to me. But the truth is that when I say I, this singular I say in general all I's. Everyone is what I say. Everyone is I, this singular I, like this here and now. Therefore, the unspecified I proves to be an abstract, indeterminate universal. The second experience thus shows sense certainty that it is no more certain of something specific when it takes its object to be what I mean by this than what when it takes its object to be simply this. Sense certainty thus comes to know by experience that its essence is neither in the object nor in the I. So what does Pinkard have to say about 92? Of course, this is only an example of many such sensuous certainties. It can be repeated. Where is the certainty? It seems as if consciousness could simply point at something that one, and it would be in possession of knowledge. Which one? Followed by that one. But of course, it is I pointing out that one. And to whom am I pointing it out? Is this a practice I could imagine myself playing all alone? After all, this act can be repeated indefinitely, so it is something like a practice. The immediacy at work here begins to look a bit odd, since it is a mediated immediacy. Okay, we have done 3 aphorisms on this one today. And yeah, we have this split in self-certainty between the this that is the I and the this that is the object. And the A conceptual nature, the A to apprehension, not comprehension. The other thing is there a link between the infinity that we see later on in the Force of the Understanding and the birth of self-consciousness and the infinity of sense certainty in the this here now? I think there is. And I'm interested in to see what gives birth to self-consciousness, the birth of self-consciousness in Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. So this is going to keep me up tonight. All right, till next time. Take care.